Thank you for your patience. I really appreciate that.
Oh, don't bother me. I've gone through this a lot of times, so it doesn't bother me.
Yeah. Um, well, why don't you talk a little bit about how did you first get into the coin operated industry?
Well, April of 1937, I had just come home from Idaho, uh, where I had a job with the Forest Service in the CCC camps. I worked as a dispatcher, one of the famous and large uh, places in Idaho where they had lookout towers for fires and everything else. They put me in charge of the fire deals for the winter. When I came home for the middle part of the winter, I did not want to go back to Idaho because I had 8 brothers and sisters, mother and father, a family here. What am I going to do in Idaho? They wouldn't see me for the rest of my life, probably, except maybe once a year. So what I had to do, I went to church almost every day praying that some way or other I would find a job. And those days it was very difficult to find a job because it was still in the depths of the depression. However, in April, I was walking down Ashland Avenue and it started raining like all blazes, and I couldn't even afford an umbrella. I didn't have an umbrella. So I opened up a door to a company that I didn't even know was there, just to get out of the rain. And the woman opens up the window when I came in. She says, "Are you looking for a job?" Good Lord, I've been looking for a job for so many months. I just wondered why she would ask me. She asked me if I could solder. I said, "I can solder, I can do anything." I entered Genco, Genco, owned by 3 Gensberg brothers, Dave Gensberg, Lou Gensberg, and Meyer Gensberg. And they were then making pin games. And here I walked into a place that was making pin games. I haven't even never played a pin game in my life. That was the beginning of my being in the industry, as you say, pin game industry. That was the beginning.
So pinball back then was pretty different than pinball today.
When I came to the industry at that time, pinball games were just being introduced from battery-powered games, which we used the large C batteries, to electrical games with the transformers giving you 110 volts and then transfer to whatever voltages are needed to operate the games.
So were you actually a pinball designer at this point then?
Well, at that time, I was not a pin game designer. I did all the electrical work for all the games that Harvey Heist did. Harvey Heist taught me so much. It was unbelievable. He gave me the input of how to build games to attract good players and what would keep them there and so forth. It happened in 1947 in October when Gottlieb came out with Humpty Dumpty with the flippers, 6 flippers on its games. And what happened is, just early December, Harvey Heist was incapacitated, and he couldn't build a game with flippers for the show, which took place the last week in January 1948 in Chicago. You know, all the companies were located in Chicago anyway. Anyway, what happened is they asked me if I could design a game for the show. I only had a month and a half in which to get it finished. So I worked on it day and night during the holiday and New Year's. And by 2 weeks before the show, I had my game ready, which was Triple Action. And all the companies that came to the show had copied in some way Gottlieb's 6 flippers, whether it was 2, 4, or 6. They were all located on the sides of the games. I put in only 2 flippers on my game and put them right in the middle of the game where the ball goes out, was going to go out and get lost. And what happened is it became the game of the show. And that was my first game that I ever designed all by myself.
Why did you think that 2 flippers was better than 6?
Well, at that time, I was brought up to be very, very conservative and to think and how to save money. I wasn't going to go put no 2 or no 4 or 6 flippers on a game when I can get away with 2. So I put them at the game. The only place I could think of putting there, that's where I put them.
Now, one thing I had read was that Humpty Dumpty, the reason it had 6 flippers is that the flippers were too weak to get the ball up to the top of the playfield. So you needed multiple flippers in order to accomplish that.
That's correct.
How could you get away with 2 when they needed 6 to accomplish that?
Because I had enough power in my flippers to bring the ball up to the top. The game had to be designed in such a way so the ball would ricochet off of sections that would take it to the top of the field. No problem at all. That's why the game was so interesting. The biggest change in the entire industry was the introduction of the flippers, because it made all other games that were manufactured before them obsolete. Absolutely obsolete. There was never anything in the industry that ever happened that did that to games that were built before that time. Because I know that because we must have sold thousands and thousands of kits with flippers for them to put on old games that they could put on, if they could put them on. I always so often come to a show and find one of my old Genko games that has two flippers on the bottom. I said, I never had flippers at the bottom of this game. So it's very exciting to know that how many of them were sold. And it definitely did change the industry.
So you had your first big hit, I guess.
My personal hit, yes.
Yeah. What did you start doing after that?
Well, what happened during that period of time is Harvey Heiss, who at that time decided to leave Genco and go to Florida, where he bought a double ranch home and with a utility apartment, which I used every time I went down there with my wife. And what happened is I then took over and ran the place till 1958, until the company went broke and went out of business. And then what happened then is I had three key people in my organization that were the responsible for making our games for the last 5, 6, 7 years. One was the electrical mechanical man, Harry Thompson, the electrical man, Berninger, and the man, Johnny Merzak, who took the games on the line and took care of it. That was three people and myself. And when we closed up, the four of us were out of work. So I had no trouble at all getting a job, because I was a designer of games at that time. But everybody wanted to hire me, and I wouldn't go with them. I tried to get somebody to take all four of us, because I wanted the other three people to get jobs. They needed them after all the years. So what I did is I went from place to place. I even went to a place like Seaburg and tried to get them to hire us, because we also built gun games, and Seaburg had just got through making a gun game called Coon Hunt, Coon, raccoons running up, Coon Hunt. But that was not necessarily a good name for a game to make at that time. And what happened is the game didn't function properly, and they had to burn hundreds of them in their back place because they couldn't sell them. So I went to Seaburg and told them, hey, I had a group of guys that could build games, gun games for you if you want them. And they had a meeting, and finally came to me and said, no, we can't hire all you guys, so we forgot about it. I went to other places like Lynn Durant at United, and he wanted to hire me, but he wouldn't take all four of us. So I went to see my good friend Bill O'Donnell at Bally, and I told him my position. I says, I got a problem. He says, what's your problem? I said, I got these four guys, including myself, and that are let go at Genco, and I'm not going to take a job anywhere unless I can get all four of us taken. He took all four of us. All four of us. Can you imagine that? We started working at the Bally and did very, very well, making a couple of gun games. And what happened is, while I was there, Sam Stern contacted me and wanted me to come to work at Williams, because he had Harry Mabs, the original inventor of flippers, working for him, and he was already good to be in 70-some years old, and he thought that he needed a replacement for him. So I went to Bill O'Donnell and said, hey, I got a good offer for making pen games. I'd like to have you release me. He said, you go ahead and go, but promise me one thing. Don't ever take any one of the three guys here, because they're so valuable to us. They stayed there until they retired.
So what year did you move over to Williams?
1960 in February.
Okay. And what did you start working on at Williams?
Pen games. No, I built a gun game, the first gun game. The first gun game I built there. But then I started making pen games. And from then on, I built 7, 8 games a year for 4 or 5 years, until they gave me Norm Clark to work with me. And then with two of us, we're working, the only two of us that were alternating, making games for Williams.
7 or 8 games a year, that's a lot of games.
Yep, so sometimes I made as many as 9 games a year.
Whereas in the past, sort of modern pinball now, it takes, I guess Williams it's in the recent period would come out with maybe 2 or 3 models a year, or was it more than that?
Well, let's put it like this. If you're going to come back, if you're going to get into the 90s and the mid 90s and the late 90s, it always took a design engineer almost a year to 13, 14, 15 months to have a game ready for production.
So it just got a lot more complicated to make a
The games became more complicated, more complex, and more equipment.
You mentioned gun games. Obviously, those must have been pretty big at this point in time.
Oh, we used to use the Remington rifles, and we needed Remington rifles, and so we contacted Remington and told them that we'd buy them if they would give us a price for them. So they said we have rejects, so we got Remington rifles for about $14 a piece. And they weren't actually rejects. They were were made rejects just to give them to us so that we couldn't put bullets in them and shoot them, And that's how we stayed with Remington all the time. I had a patent on one of the gun games in which I was shot at a rolling ball that would roll from the right side down and then roll from the left side down again. And if you hit the ball would disappear. And I have a patent on that, one of those. Of course, I had a lot of other patents, but that's one I'm very proud of in the gun game business.
What was the name of the game that used that?
I can't remember. I made so many of gun games, it's almost impossible to remember sometimes. If I looked at it, I'd tell you right now.
So you're designing up to 9 pinballs a year for Williams now. How many other designers were there at Williams?
There was nobody there until Norm Clark came in about 1965 or somewhere in that area. Then after that, he and I just alternated making games because he was a good designer.
So you then made about 4 or 5 a year, and he made about 4 or 5?
Well, at that time, we didn't have to make that many games. We made 6 or 7 games a year because we started making more production. More production. After all, you want to remember that when we started making games, I started making games at Genco. We were only making 300, 400 games a run. Then went to 500. Then after 2 years, I got it up to about 1,000, 2,000 games. And then when Norm Clark came in, we averaged almost 3,000 games. Now you're talking about the length of time that it took to make those and sell them. So what happened is you didn't have to make that many games.
How was pinball, this is the early 60s now, how was pinball then different from 1947 or 48 when you did your first machine?
My first machine? Well, I'll tell you what, at that time what we were doing is making games that had more direct association with events of the world. Like I was always building games with the space deal. I made a game that followed this fellows from Cleveland who was the first one in the space. I made a game that with that particular space deal, and then of course I made a game called the Space Mission, and that was also the one in which Russia and the United States, the Soyuz and the one that we had got together in space in 1975. More of them were beginning to get much current. Same thing with Norm Clark. He built games having something to do with active actions of the day.
But the game itself hadn't changed too much. The theming had changed, but the game
didn't change until 70s when we went to solid state. That was the biggest change in the industry at that time.
You saw pinball go through a lot of changes. Did pinball get better throughout the years?
Always. Pinball always got better. Better and better and better. And the better it got, the more it cost. And the more it cost, the more we try to get out of the player to play it. First we got them from the 10 cents to the quarter. Then from the quarter we worked on $0.50. And then then some places we tried $1 and didn't work. So now what are you going to do? Here we're building better games, starting to cost more, and now we can't even go beyond the $0.50. And then now we're building more games, better games, cost more money, Now, the operator has got the game. He can't get enough of his money back because he can't get more than 50 cents a play. If the player will play it for 50 cents, then he finds out that he has to get it down to a quarter in order to attract some of the people to play. And now he lost even those players that were playing for a quarter. They're home. So where are we going to get the players from? There's the problem. We've got to get somebody to play the games.
Of the machines you design, what's your favorite machine?
My favorite machine? I always have to say, first of all, is Triple Action because of the two flippers. But then my next favorite game is Space Mission because at that time when I made Space Mission, we broke the record for the number of electrical mechanical games built by Williams. And I felt very proud of that because the game is a very good game.
How many did it sell? Do you remember?
16,000.
16,000?
Yeah.
That's a lot of machines.
Yeah, that was a lot of machines for electrical mechanical games, yes.
Yeah. What's the best machine you've played that you didn't design?
Best machine that I did design, 8-ball, Bally's 8-ball by Norm Clark.
Why is that one so good?
Oh, it's got everything. It's got everything. Everything in it that a good designer would put in, you know. We can't help but I have to admire everything that Norm Clark did over there.
It sounded like from what you said, you stopped being a pinball designer specifically in maybe like in the mid '80s or so.
Oh, somewhere in that time, yeah.
So what was your job after that?
Well, I just stayed around and watched the building games. I was there because I had a good background of knowledge of what would be good, what would be bad. Players would ask me about features that they would put on, and you tell them that it worked once before and it didn't, and if you improve on it, it'll work good. And I always like to play their games and give them my comments. And I guess they didn't want to get rid of me because I started the business coming back way back in 1960. So they said, well, this guy's got to be around for a while. He knows too much.
So did you retire when Williams shut down pinball?
I worked until next year. They gave me a year's retirement pay for carrying, and I worked that entire year. I worked the entire year. I never had any time off.
Were you working in gaming machines then?
I was putting together all the memorabilia and materials that I had accumulated for the last 40, 50 years, and brochures from different companies. And I worked on putting together all this memorabilia that I have and accumulated. So now they put all of that stuff in Waukegan. They set up a place for me over there with my office and everything else, and I go there still trying to put all this stuff together.
Interesting.
And the company did very well for my wife and I when I retired. I just want you to know that I have no complaints with the company. They did very well for my wife. They took care of my wife and I for hospitalization for the rest of our lives. So that's very good. That's one very important factor. And I guess there was some way of saying, hey, this guy deserves a little something. So they're paying for our hospitalization in addition to Medicare. And at the same time, if something should happen to me, my wife will get also until she passes away.
That's great.
The company did very well for me. The company did very well for me all the years that I was with them. I have no complaints. No complaints whatsoever. And besides that, I just want to say that the people I worked with in all the years that I've worked, and especially in the latter part of my years, they were all tremendously gifted people. People that did very well for the industry, and in many cases never got the credit for it that they deserved, that they really deserved. And at the same time, that went for people like Harry Mabs, who started the flippers. He never got the credit that he should have gotten. Then people like Harvey Heiss, who from 1931 worked with Genco and did all of their mechanical layouts and electrical layouts, and from whom I learned so much. He never got the credit. There are so many people in this industry that never really got the credit that they should have for having what they've done to into the industry.
That's the end of this tape, and you answered all my questions really well.
Well, so I did the best I could.
That was great.
I enjoyed talking. Okay.